Hello everyone, welcome to another interesting and informative session of the Analyst brought to you by Vajiram and Ravi. In today's session, we will discuss 9 important articles as featured in the Hindu and Indian Express for your comprehensive understanding of the current affairs explained to you in the easiest language possible. The topics are as follows. From your Analyst section, in the first topic, we'll try to discuss about the grave social issue of Sarpanch Pati in the light of the recent ruling by the Supreme Court. Then in the second topic, we'll try to understand what is Global Goal on Adaptation Framework as envisaged under the COP28 of UNFCCC and how that can lead to the pathway of climate resilience. Then we will take up 7 topics in your simplified section where we'll try to simplify the news for you and also provide value addition, so stay tuned. Recently, the Supreme Court set aside the High Court ruling allowing the Woman Sarpanch to continue in the political office, thus highlighting the social issue of Sarpanch Pati which still prevails in the year of 2024 and also forms an important component of your GS2 paper under the theme of issues related to women as well as the concept of local self-governance. So let's first try to understand this idea of Woman Sarpanch. Following the Gandhian principles of organizing village panchayats and ensuring them to function as a unit of self-governance as also envisaged under the Article 40 of the Constitution, which is basically a directive principle of state policy, as well as following the recommendation of the Thangan Committee of 1988, which actually suggested for the reservation of seats for the women in such Panchayati Raj institutions if to be created, the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1992 was enacted, providing the constitutional status to the Panchayati Raj bodies. So remember that the Panchayati Raj institutions created beforehand itself, right? There was a state which actually created the first Panchayati Raj institution in the year of 1959. Can anyone name that? Now, the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act of 1992 actually gave a constitutional status to these Panchayati Raj institutions. And an article 243D, which was actually added from this very constitutional amendment, provided for reservation of women at several seats. First of all, the 33% of the seats as the Gram Pradhan or the head of the village was reserved for the women. Right? This also includes, keep this in mind, the seats which are actually reserved for the women who come from SC or ST. Right? So there are 33% of the seats which are reserved for SC and ST as well. Then 33% of the office of chairperson at all the 3 levels of the Panchayati Raj institutions, which are basically the village, the block, the district, that is also reserved for the women. So let's say that if there exist 100 gram villages or 100 villages across the country, 33% of them has to be headed by a female representative. That was the idea, right? Now let's see what is the idea of Pradhan Pati. Right? So despite such affirmative action taken by the government to actually empower the women at the grassroots level, it has still not been able to actually affect the deep-rooted patriarchy which exists in the villages. A grave example of that is actually the culture of Pradhan Pati. Let's first try to understand what is this concept. Let's say that there is a man named A. And this man has certain political aspirations. So he wants to fight the election of Pradhan to become a Pradhan of a particular village. However, the seat as the head of the village for that particular village has actually been reserved for women as per the directive of Article 243D of the Constitution. So obviously this person is unable to fight the election. So what he does? He actually makes his wife or spouse to fight this election. And the moment his wife actually turns out as the winner, the actual political decision-making power, right, or all the functions as the head of the village is actually held or wielded by this man himself, right? For example, in Madhya Pradesh Panchayat, it was actually the husband of the woman who actually went to take the oath instead of the elected women representatives. Right? And that happened very recently in the year of 2023 itself. Why does this Pradhan Pati concept still exist? Because of the deep-rooted patriarchy, the notion which actually associates this woman of being incapable of, taking any strong decision-making power and thus unsuitable to adorn such political offices. A great depiction of which is actually also visible in your famous web series of Panchayat, where the actual Pradhan, the woman Pradhan, is act as a de jure or nominal executive. However, the real executive or the de facto Pradhan is whom? Her husband, right? Now, let's try to go a bit deep in this and try to understand that what are the causes. The causes of persistence of such issue, such grave social issue in the year of 2024. So on one end of spectrum, we are talking about the women empowerment. We are talking about their increasing female labor force participation rate, which has reached up to 41% as per the periodic labor force survey. If we talk about their educational attainment, so if we just look at the World Bank India report of 2023, the female literacy rate is around 74% in comparison to 84% male literacy. So that is also a very high number, because the same report highlights that how at the time of the independence, 1 out of 11 women in India were actually educated. Now that has actually reached to 9 out of 11. Even if you look at the highest constitutional position, that is the head of the state or the president of the country, that is actually being currently held by a woman herself, and that is Srimati Draupadi Murmu. But on the other end of a spectrum, there exists such a regressive culture which actually undermines the position of women in the society, and a major cause for that is the deep-rooted patriarchal norms which has been prevalent in the Indian society and has been passed from one generation to another. A great example of that can actually be borrowed from a medieval text called as Tabakat-e-Nasiri, which was written by Minhas-e-Siraz. So Minhas-e-Siraz in this particular book actually talks about the Delhi Sultanate, which was established from the year of 1206 and lasted till 1526, right, till the first battle of Panipat. So in the description of the Delhi Sultanate, Minhas-e-Siraz also describes about the Rajia Sultan, the only and the last female sultan of the whole Delhi Sultanate, and she ruled from 1236 to 1240. So when Minhas-e-Siraz is describing about Razia Sultan, he writes that Razia had all the virtues to become a great ruler except one, that she was born in the wrong gender. The second is the poor social and the financial status, specifically of the rural women, where in most of the cases they are actually dependent, even financially, on their male counterpart, right? That can also lead to the issue of the technical divide which exists, the lack of political education, and all of this actually transpires into what? Lack of capacity building or training to how to actually adorn such offices, right? How to perform these functions. For example, very recently I was actually talking to one female student of mine, and even though she comes from a village, she was completely unaware about the functioning of these Gram Panchayat. Actually, be very honest and just comment down how many of you have actually visited such Gram Panchayat offices or have ever participated in any meeting of Gram Sabha. The next is the issue of caste and gender based discrimination. So obviously the caste dynamics which prevails in the rural area. So first of all, let's say there is a male person who is coming from a higher caste, right? In his mind, the so-called higher caste. So he has that kind of, let's say, superficial level of superiority among others. So first of all, he will obviously be very reluctant to work under the lower caste Pradhan. On top of that, if there is a female Pradhan, right? So that can actually violate a lot of caste norms or religious norms which some people have, right? Next is the absence of strong deterrence laws against these men who are actually unofficially holding such positions. Also, there exists the dual role syndrome and the time poverty, because the women are mostly associated with provision of the care jobs as per the World Bank, right? So it is considered that it is the sole duty of women to actually take care of the household chores, to actually rear the child, and thus they have what? The time poverty, to invest their time in learning the skills, learning the capacity building to actually hold these offices, to function these offices in more vibrant manner, right? So obviously they are considered as incapable first hand. And all of this actually violates what? The Article 14, that is the right to equality, and Article 21, that is right to dignified life of the woman. The question arises here, some of you might also be thinking on this line, that why do we even need a woman sarpanch, right? Does male sarpanch not performing good? The idea is that these female, because if we talk about from the gender perspective, they are facing several issues at the grassroots level, and that will be reflected in the decision making in the official policies only when these women will actually take up those positions. To actually validate this argument, we will be taking up the help of the Nobel laureate Esther Duflo's research, which she did specifically in the West Bengal, where she showcased that how these women, when they wield such political power and the offices, how they actually leads or actually includes their compassion and empathy for better decision making. So for example, the Duflo's research in West Bengal actually showcased that the women were more likely to invest in the public infrastructure, for example, drinking water facility. Why? Because it is actually these women who travel to the long distances to fetch water, right? For example, you guys might have heard about Pani Patni concept which exists in Maharashtra, where actually people from higher caste or wealthy affluent class are actually marrying a lot of women so that they can go to long distances and fetch water for them. I'm not kidding, just Google it. Second, let's take example of Rekha Ramu from the village of Pandeshwaram, which is basically a village in Chennai. How she actually took the initiative of promoting organic farming, promotion of primary education in the villages, or how she fought the social taboos of caste discrimination and raised her voice against the domestic violence. Or you guys can also quote the case study of Neeru Yadav, who is very famous as Hockey Wali Sarpanch in the state of Rajasthan, where she actually promoted the sport of hockey. She created a whole facility for that because she was very well aware about the importance of sport for the physical well-being of the woman. She also actually enrolled these women for skill development under the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. Another example can be of Saroj Agrawal from Odisha, where being educated, she actually used the drones to disburse disability medicines and pensions, right? Because she could had that empathy and compassion. She could feel for such people. A very great example of how women in local governance are actually paving the way towards a Viksit Bharat or developed nation is also of Alka Mehato, a Mukhia of Purabdi village in the Ramgarh district in Jharkhand, where her first task in the office was to encourage the people to build toilets in the home. And you guys can read her audio, where she narrates her story that how as a woman she had to wake up at the early hours of 4 a.m. to go the fields to defecate. Thus, if the women are actually taking up these positions, it can actually lead to more responsive governance, and that is why the government of India has also taken several steps. First is obviously under the Rashtriya Gram Swaraj Abhiyan. So first of all, we are trying to promote such local Panchayati Raj institutions, and the government is also incentivizing the participation of women in such Panchayati Raj institutions. And under the Gram Panchayat Development Program, the inclusion of women has been made mandatory to first of all create the plans for specific gender needs at the villages, right? And that is being led by the women pradhans, so leading to the more responsive governance, more inclusive governance. The next is that the Ministry of Panchayati Raj and institutions has also creating the national workshop to create the leadership role within the women coming from the small rural areas. The Panchayati Raj Ministry is also using the community radio programs to fight the Sarpanch Pati practice, thus creating a kind of a practice of social engineering to create more awareness among the men, right? And our Prime Minister has also gave the clarion call to actually end this Sarpanch Pati culture to elevate the poverty and promote education at the ground level. Now, what was the Supreme Court's ruling very recently? So, the bench of justice actually gave the court a powerful backing to a Panchayati Sarpanch in Maharashtra to continue with her good work. So, she was actually being removed from her office, right, because of this gender bias which prevails, right? So, Supreme Court observed that such instances of the bias which was being faced by her, she had to deal with at the grassroots level. It cast a heavy shadow over the country's effort to actually have more women elected representatives. And the matter of removal of such an elected public representative should not be treated so lightly, especially when it concerns the women who comes from the rural areas. The Supreme Court thus set aside the High Court order and allowed the Miss Patil to continue as the Sarpanch. So on the basis of this discussion, just try to attempt this particular question. If possible, comment your answer in the comment box and we move forward to the next news. The lead editorial highlights the need of global goal on adaptation framework envisaged in the Conference of Parties 28 of UNFCCC in the backdrop of the issue of climate change. So first of all, we'll try to understand the issue of climate change, which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of environment conservation and climate change. And then we will try to learn about what is this global goal on adaptation framework. The question arises here that is there exist a need of climate resilience globally as well as locally in India? So obviously, when we have embarked upon this journey of technological advancements, let's say for example under the Digital India, or we have actually been emphasizing upon increasing our industrial production to become the developed nation by the year of 2047, the idea of Viksit Bharat, it has also come at a dear cost of use of fossil fuels, leading to the large-scale greenhouse gas emissions such as for example carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide, which has actually led to or resulted in the global warming induced climate change, which is evident from the extreme weather events such as for example intensification of tropical cyclone, on which a question appeared in your mains 2024. So to actually make you guys understand the seriousness of this climate change, we will be referring to the State of Global Climate Report 2024, which was actually released by the World Meteorological Organization, according to which the average temperature globally has already risen up to 1.45 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial level. And 2023 was actually the warmest year in the 174-year observational record. Keep this in mind that it is clearly surpassing the previous joint warmest years such as for example in 2016 or 2020. Also, this has been caused because of the concentration of the three main greenhouse gases being the carbon dioxide, the methane and the nitrous oxide, which actually reached the record high observed levels in 2022. The heat content of the world ocean was actually highest in 2023. And the marine heat wave expansion reached up to 32% of the ocean surface. Earlier it was reaching to 24% of the ocean surface. And all of this has actually led to what? The marine heat waves that has actually been further intensified in the region of tropical region, specifically from your 20° north to 20° south, right? So obviously it is impacting India significantly, the region of Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea, right? Just to test your factual information here, can anyone actually comment down what is the latitudinal extent of our country, right? Then obviously because of this marine heat wave, there is taking place a contrast in heating and the cooling pattern of the North Atlantic Ocean, thus leading to the weakening of a phenomena called as Atlantic Meridional Ocean or overturning circulation, right? Where actually the hot water from the region of tropic is actually transported to the cold areas of Arctic, right? Why? Because the warm water is actually lighter, so it rises above and it flows towards the Arctic, and the colder water from the Arctic Ocean is because actually it's cold and it is denser, so it actually goes down and then it comes to the region of tropics and comes up. So that this Atlantic Meridional overturning circulation actually used to act as a major tool or source for controlling the weather phenomena, right? Maintaining the temperature, but now that is weakening. So obviously there will be more harsh winters in the Northern America and the Northern European regions, right? Now, obviously, because there is a rise in sea surface level as well, right? So, sea surface level has increased by around 0.6 meter. So, that will actually significantly impact the small island states, such as, for example, Vanuatu or Papua New Guinea, right? All these extreme weather events is also leading to the melting of the glaciers. So, 32% of the earth, which is actually covered from these glaciers, 68% of the world's water supply actually comes from these glaciers. So melting of that can actually lead to a lot of water security crisis. Now coming to how vulnerable is India. So we'll be taking help of two reports here. First is obviously some data will be sourced from State of Global Climate Report as well as the Green Watch report, according to which India is the 7th most climate change vulnerable country. Just look at the states with the highest vulnerability index rank. Assam ranking at the top, followed by Andhra Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka and Bihar. And the finding states that 27 out of 35 states and UTs are highly vulnerable, and 463 of 640 districts of the country are vulnerable to extreme weather events such as, for example, extreme floods, droughts and cyclones. And over 45% of these districts has actually undergone some unsustainable landscape and infrastructural changes, right? These extreme weather events which are taking place, this global warming, it is also adversely impacting the Himalayan ecosystem, and the temperature in these Himalayan region has actually increased by 0.6 degrees Celsius, right? What that can lead to? That can lead to the melting of glacier, right? So if the glaciers will melt, obviously that will actually significantly impact our water security, because these glaciers, they actually provide, like, the source for the perennial rivers which we have, such as, for example, Brahmaputra, Ganga and Yamuna. These rivers which actually feed and sustain around 80 crore population of the country. Also, it can lead to various kind of glacial lake outburst floods, such as, for example, if you guys can recall the Chamoli disaster which took place in the year of 2021 in the Garhwal region, also asked in your UPSC mains examination. It can actually transpire into various kind of extreme weather events, such as, for example, flash floods, heat waves, droughts, and that will significantly impact what? Our food security. So you guys can recall here the National Food Security Act of 2013, according to which already we are providing 75% food to subsidized food to the population of the country, right? So if the food security will actually get disturbed, what will happen to these people? Now, to understand the impact of such extreme weather impact on the local economy, let's take the case study of the 6,000 crore plus apple economy of Himachal Pradesh, right? What happened here? So first of all, imagine Himachal Pradesh, a northern state. Now imagine this Himachal Pradesh in the month of February 2023. Obviously, you will be expecting a very mild, very cold temperature at that particular point of time. However, there took place extreme warming in the month of February. And then when it came to the month of July, there was actually high precipitation. So that actually significantly impacted not only the production of apple, but also the logistics of apple or the supply of apple from one state to another. Now imagine yourself as an apple producer or trader, right? You will be significantly impacted from such extreme weather events, and that is exactly what is happening, disruption of local economy. Then with the rising sea surface temperature, there is taking place a thermal expansion which is further creating the ideal condition for the intensification of cyclones as well as El Nino, right? So normally we connect El Nino with what? The drought in our country. So there is more disaster events as well as droughts or flash droughts which are taking place. That is why India has actually stepped up and taken several steps, right? So we have National Action Plan on Climate Change. And under that, first of all, what we have tried to put impetus upon the renewable energy in our country. So for example, under the Pradhan Mantri Kusum Yojana, we are actually trying to solarize the agriculture pumps. We have also launched and joined the International Solar Alliance to create a solar power grid which will actually expand to other countries as well, right? Then we have launched Surya Ghar Yojana, right? So further promote the installation of rooftop solar at the top of the houses. Then we also launched a national hydrogen mission, under which we have envisaged to produce 30 million metric ton of green hydrogen by the year of 2030. India is also trying for ethanol blending program, under which we are actually envisaging 20% of ethanol blending with petrol by the year of 2025 itself. And to further promote biofuel, we have also joined Global Biofuel Alliance. Also, the government has launched a Govardhan scheme, which is basically the idea is to create waste to energy plants at the village level, right? So let's say to use the cow dungs and things like that, which actually releases a lot of carbon dioxide, and convert them into energy producing sources. Also, for the curbing down the CO2 emission from the cooking which used to take place from the wood and other sources, the government actually tried to promote the LPG or the adoption of LPG under the Ujjwala Yojana. Then there are certain other initiatives as well, such as, for example, the green credit program launched by the government to incentivize sustainable actions, the PM Pranam to actually incentivize to promote alternative fertilizers, then to create waste to wealth plant as we were discussing under the Govardhan scheme, the Misty scheme to actually, which is for to just step up the mangrove plantation along the coastlines, and the Amrit Dharohar scheme from the optimal uses of your wetlands, right? And all of this will actually help our country to achieve the Panch Amrit target which we set for ourselves at COP26 in Glasgow. The idea being to actually reach non-fossil energy capacity of 500 gigawatt, to actually reduce 1 billion carbon emission by 2030, to reduce the carbon intensity below 45% by 2030, and finally to become a net zero country where the amount of carbon dioxide which we are actually emitting, that is actually being balanced by the sourcing of this carbon dioxide as well by the year of 2070, right? So these are the steps which has been taken by the government. Now let's try to understand what does the today's editorial is actually emphasizing upon, right? So the today's editorial actually talks about the Conference of Parties 28, COP28 of UNFCCC, which took place in Dubai, UAE, right? First of all, let's try to understand what is this idea of Conference of Parties, correct? So this Conference of Parties, which actually take place under the larger framework of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was actually enacted in the year of 1992, is basically a multilateral treaty which was signed among the countries, India being one of the signatory as well. And these countries, they actually meet in these annual conferences which take place. So for example, in this COP28, 197 countries participation. And these participating countries actually deliberate upon the global endeavors which are taking place to curb down the issue of climate change, specifically aligning it with the idea of Paris Agreement target. What is the Paris Agreement target? The target is to curb down the global warming which is taking place up to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the end of 2100, right? So the temperature should not rise above 1.5 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial level. However, as we can see from the State of Global Climate report, it has already reached 1.45 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial level. Thus, certain very important and immediate steps were taken. One of them was the global stocktake, the first global stocktake, which came in the COP28, right? What is the global stocktake text? This GST, it is basically the periodic review mechanism which was envisaged under the Paris Agreement, which actually directs the countries to triple their renewable energy capacity by the year of 2030. So just understand this global stocktake, right? Global stocktake is basically a kind of a review report where each and every participating country submits a kind of a final report to the headmaster, which is UNFCCC, and tells that, see, this is what I have done to reduce the climate change, right? So the idea was actually first envisaged under the Paris Agreement. Then there was an adoption of the rule book which took place in 2018 under the Talanoa Dialogue, right? The idea was that the countries will set their nationally determined contribution, correct? Then in 2019, the Article 6 were actually negotiated, the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which basically provides for the financing mechanism. So basically, let's say I'm a poor country and I say I don't have money, how I will actually, put climate resilience infrastructure or something. So the developed countries or the rich countries were like, don't worry, we will give you the money. And this mechanism is governed under the Article 6 of Paris Agreement. So every country submitted their review, and that is called as the first global stocktake, which was done in the 2023 UAE, right? The idea is that the country will submit their revised nationally determined contribution by the year of 2025, and their second review will be submitted as the second global stocktake in 2028. The idea is that this will eventually lead to 2050 each and every country achieving the carbon neutrality and climate resilience, right? Now there were certain other initiatives such as, for example, transitioning away from fossil fuels to achieve the net zero by 2050. The global goal on adaptation framework, which is actually the main point of this editorial, that is to double the adaptation finance for developing countries by the developed countries. Then the climate finance, right, which is being discussed under this GGA. So as per the estimation of UNCTAD, that is United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the new collective quantified goals, these developing countries will require $500 billion by 2025. And for that purpose, a loss and damage funds were created to actually compensate the countries which are significantly impacted by the climate change, giving priority to the small island states, obviously, right? The idea is that this global goal on adaptation is basically a framework to ensure an adequate response guiding countries in their efforts, right? This UAE framework for global climate resilience is actually expected to strengthen the efforts of the country, which will eventually include the impact of climate change, the vulnerability and the risk assessment, that how much risk vulnerable a country is. For example, India is the 7th most climate change vulnerable country. A country driven planning process and the implementation of such plans by the year of 2030. The framework outlines the target for 2030, such as, for example, climate induced water scarcity, attaining the climate resilient food production, enhancing the health services to actually mitigate the climate related impact. However, there are several challenges, and one important challenge is the means of implementation, right? That we'll discuss later. The idea is that as per the 2023 adaptation gap report, it actually tells that right now these developing countries, they require $366 billion every single year. But what are the challenges in this financing mechanism, right? First is the intense divergence between the developed and developing countries, because largely we are saying that because these developed nations, they rided on the industrial revolution, they are historically responsible for the majority of the CO2 emission and the global warming which has taken place. That is why you should take your responsibility and pay us, right? Pay the developing nations, and that is only when we can just convert to the climate resilience infrastructure, right? That is the idea. Now, but there is obviously the developed countries are not accepting their fault, right? So they are not accepting on this means of implementation, as well as the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and the role of adaptation committee, right? The developing countries are emphasizing the critical need for public finance, technology transfer, capacity building, right? So the developed countries, they need to fulfill their climate finance obligations as envisaged under the Article 6 of Paris Agreement, which we were discussing, right? So the article suggests certain ways. First is the effective implementation of such global goal adaptation. It will require strengthening the policy framework with clear guidelines to develop and disseminate consistent and sustainable practices. Then there shall be capacity building for even the government officials and community leaders to actually build expertise, and that will help in the institutional strengthening. And finally, there has to be a dedicated sources through which transfer of finance and climate resilience technologies shall be done from developed to developing countries. That is the idea, right? Thus, the article suggests that the upcoming negotiations, the COP29, which will take place in Baku, that will be crucial in resolving these issues. So on the basis of this decision, just try to solve this particular question, we move forward to the next news, where we will discuss upon the Nobel Prize which has been given for the physiology or medicine. And it has been given to whom? It has been given to Victor Ambros and the Gary Ruvkun, right? For what purpose, right? They has been awarded with this prestigious prize for the discovery of microRNA and discovering its role in the post-transcriptional gene regulation, right? Now try to understand this, that when we are talking about this microRNA, right, they discovered this new class of tiny RNA molecules which actually plays a crucial role in the gene regulation, which is actually essential for multicellular organisms including the humans, right? So the body, it actually makes the protein. What is protein? Protein is basically everything which you are looking in your body, right? From the keratin of your hair to your nails, each and everything is actually made up of what? Protein. And the body, it actually makes this protein with a complex process with two broad steps, that is transcription and translation, something which we are going to discuss in very much detail. Do not worry about it. First, let's try from the very basic, and that is, what does this deoxyribonucleic acid actually stands for? So one question which might be appearing in your mind is that each and every species, right, the generation of these species have some characteristic or other in common, right? For example, you might be sharing your eye color or the shape of your nose with your mother. So how does these characteristics actually pass from one generation to another? Let's say there is a cell. Inside a cell, there exists a nucleus. And within this nucleus, there is a particle which is actually responsible for the transfer of this genetic information, and that is chromosomes. These chromosomes are actually made up of two things. One is protein and other is nucleic acids. And there exists two types of nucleic acids. First is your deoxyribonucleic acid, which are actually made up of double-stranded sugar phosphate, so deoxyribose. And there is a ribonucleic acid or RNA, which is actually made up of single-stranded sugar phosphate usually. So there are two helix here as well, right? Both of these DNA and RNA have the nucleobases, three of which the base pairs are actually common, being the cytosine, guanine and adenine. Now RNA has the fourth base as uracil and the DNA has the fourth base as thiamine, right? Now there is one very important function which is actually played by this RNA. Why it is actually very important for us? That is that any cellular organism actually includes or uses the messenger RNA for the synthesis of protein, which it does on ribosome using these acidical bases, right? And these ribosomes are basically the specialized cell organelles. So try to understand that the genetic information is actually stored in the DNA inside the nucleus of each cell, and this information is actually copied to the messenger RNA, a molecule that actually contains the instruction that directs the cell to synthesize the appropriate protein. That is why your ear has this shape. That is why your eyes look like this, right? Now the proteins, this handle all kind of important jobs in the body, such as for example making muscle contract or helping the nerves to communicate, right? So the different tissues which we have in our body, they create different proteins depending on their specific function. And this differentiation among the cell is actually governed by the gene regulation, which is actually performed by this mRNA, which we'll be discussing, the microRNA, which effectively turns on or off the specific genes in a cell in order to allow it to carry its specific task. So we have understood RNA, we have understood DNA, we have understood the transfer of the genetic information, we have understood the role of the various kind of proteins in our body. Now let's try to understand the different types of RNA which exist. First of all is your messenger RNA, which actually contributes to 5% of the total RNA in a particular cell. This messenger RNA actually acts as a kind of a platform, right? So it basically converts this genetic information into a kind of a protein. That is the role of the messenger RNA. And this conversion is actually done on the ribosomes. Then there exists a ribosomal RNA, which is basically the main component of ribosome. This rRNA actually combines with special proteins to form the ribosomes, which then actually read the mRNA to form the proteins, right? So mRNA brings the information of the protein, ribosomal RNA actually creates it. And then there exists transfer RNA, which is basically a single stranded, and this actually transfers the information, as you guys can see here, creates this peptide chain on this particular ribosome. and there is this incoming transfer RNA which bounds to amino acid, and here is the messenger RNA which is basically decoding the information from the DNA. This mRNA, messenger RNA, is actually created through a process called as transcription, where the DNA's double helix is actually open, exposed or unwounded to expose the bases of each DNA strand, and then using one strand for the synthesis of protein, which actually creates the messenger RNA. Right? Now here is the two important procedure which has also been given in the newspaper. Learn this down for your prelims purposes. First is the process of transcription. That is when basically the gene's DNA sequence is actually copied into the messenger RNA in the cell nucleus. Then this messenger RNA does what? It enters the cell fluid and attaches itself to the ribosomes. Correct? The ribosomes here. Then ribosomes will now act as the site of protein synthesis. Then comes your transfer RNA. It brings the specific amino acids to these ribosomes where such process is actually taking place, the protein synthesis. These amino acids are then linked together in a particular order as instructed by the messenger RNA, which is telling this ribosome that see, this is the DNA information, put it like in these bases. And then the creation of protein ultimately takes place, the formation of protein on these ribosomes, right? And these are the proteins which will be kind of reflect the genetic information which you have derived from your parent. Now what is microRNA? MicroRNA is basically the small non-coding molecules of RNA which is actually made up of 19 to 24 nucleotides, playing an important role in the determination of how many RNA carrying genetic information will be translated into protein. That is the role of microRNA, right? So remember that the genes can be controlled through this tiny RNA molecule called as microRNAs, and thus they play a crucial role in the gene regulation for nearly all multicellular organisms, including the humans. So keep this information in your mind and we move forward to the next news, where we are going to discuss about a very interesting concept of high performance buildings, which actually forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of environment conservation. Let's first try to ask ourselves a question: is there actually even a need for high performance building? The article actually suggests that yes, indeed there is. First is that these buildings actually constitutes 40% of the total energy consumption globally, right? And this energy use actually leads to 28% of the energy related carbon emissions. So for example, there is upfront embodied carbon by this building, which is actually during the process of their manufacturing, transport and installation of the construction materials. Then there is an operational carbon, that is the building energy consumption, right, and the emission of CO2. If we talk specifically in the context of India, 30% of the national energy use and 20% of the carbon emissions are done by this very building itself. Also, the article says that the urban population is going to reach 600 million by the year of 2030. So there will be more construction, more urbanization, more concretization, and thus leading to more emission of carbon dioxide. And thus, as per the Indian Energy Agency, India risks surpassing the global benchmark for energy efficiency, right? If we look specifically the sector-wise greenhouse gas emissions in India, agriculture constitutes to around 22%, industry same, transport around 10%, electricity and heat 36%, and 5% of these greenhouse gas emission specifically comes from these buildings itself, thus making India the fourth largest greenhouse gas emitter following China, USA and the European Union as whole. So if we talk only in the terms of country, we rank third globally, right, in the terms of greenhouse gas emission, and thus indeed there is a need for such high performance building. Now the article actually differentiates between two kinds of building. One is your green building and other is your high performance building. Let's first try to understand what are these green buildings, right? So the green building is actually, first of all, both the concepts actually aim to reduce the environmental impact and energy consumption, improving the occupants' comfort as well. The green energy buildings specifically deals with a certification programs playing a crucial role in their creation. The programs which basically assesses what? Assesses the design intent and the final outcomes across the various categories using the established benchmarks. With the key areas of concern for these green buildings are what? Efficient use of energy, renewable energy, pollution and waste reduction measures, uplifting the health and quality of the life of the inhabitants, good indoor environment air quality. Just look at these green buildings which are being adopted by the countries like Singapore. So now what is a high performance building? A high performance building actually deals with specific measurable goals using smart design strategies, which first of all has site specific design approaches. They have terrain water management. They have use of sustainable materials. For example, low U value windows to actually maximize their thermal efficiency, or your grey water recycling and rainwater harvesting, as well as they actually use building management systems to actually allow the operators to monitor the performance of the overall building, including sharing the real-time analytics. Real-time analytics about what? About the sustainable curtain walls, the green roof, the photovoltaic skylight, the LED lighting system which can also be connected with the solar power, solar panel gates, the solar shading system, the natural cooling as well. So does India has such high performance building? Yes, absolutely. The article talks about the Unnati building in the Greater Noida. What they have done? They have actually installed climate smart glasses which actually absorbs very less thermal content, so it keeps the indoor already cool. You will not require to actually switch on your AC, so thus you will actually consume less energy. At the same time, they have created a kind of a artificial facade to these buildings following the sun's path, so again less amount of thermal heating, less amount of energy uses, right? These are the idea of high performance building which you guys can actually include in your answers. And what are the benefits which are being offered by these high performance building? First of all, it can reduce the need of frequent upgrades, right? So they offer various kind of environmental benefits. They last longer and don't require such upgrades. They also provide higher returns on investments due to higher property value and lower maintenance cost of these buildings. Also their long-term sustainability. They also offer various kind of social well-being, right? So for example, if you are actually working in these kind of buildings which are actually, energy smart, climate smart, so your working performance will also improve. It will actually lead to low carbon and sustainable economy as well as forward thinking development as well. So that is the idea which has been suggested by this article. Keep this in your mind and we move forward to the next news. Now, domestic violence in India is an entrenched problem. If we look at the NCRB report, National Crime Record Bureau report, 70% of women in India actually faces one or other kind of domestic violence. And one such example of domestic violence is actually the issue of marital rape, which forms an important component of your GS1 paper under the theme of social issues. What is marital rape? Marital rape is actually forcing your spouse to establish intercourse without her consent, thus actually degrading the position of the woman or considering a woman in a position where she cannot make decisions of her life. Now, what is the idea of marital rape? Is it criminalized in the world? Yes, more than 100 countries has actually criminalized the idea of marital rape. What about India? So earlier, the section 375 actually used to deal with this idea. The section 375 of Indian Penal Code of 1860 used to deal with this idea of marital rape. Is it actually anywhere criminalized explicitly? The idea is no. What does the section 375 of IPC used to say? And now that has actually been transformed into the section 63 exception 2 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita, which has been enacted in 2023. It basically states that sexual intercourse or sexual act by a man with his own wife, the wife not being under the 18 years of age, is not rape. So basically, let's say that there is a woman and she is above the 18 years of age. Why the 18 years? Because of the Prevention of Children from Sexual Offences Act of 2013, which actually describes the age of a children being the 18 years. So not being violative of this exception has been provided. This exception actually presumes that the wife is actually presumed to have provided perpetual consent to her husband to actually establish any kind of sexual intercourse with her without her permission, thus obviously violating the Article 21 or the right to dignified life of her. If we look at the latest research, it actually states that if we look at the rape of these women by the husband, the data provided by National Family Health Service says that it was around 6,590. The officially reported to the National Crime Record Bureau was only 37, and the proportion of the cases which are being reported is actually 0.6%. Now just look at the percent of married women sexually abused by the men. 82% by the current husband, 13% by the former husband, 1.4% by some immediate family, right? So obviously this is a very grave issue. Now, why the government is not criminalizing such serious issue? Because there are certain arguments which has been given by the central government. First is that the government says that there exists differential treatment of married and unmarried women by this act. It does not violate the Article 14 or the right to equality. Why? Because the central government is saying that the married and unmarried women are not equally placed. The factum of marriage, the government argues, it creates a continuing expectation of reasonable sexual access. Not my words, the words of the government, right? Now the article obviously very rightfully asks actually that who will get to define what does this reasonable sexual access actually means. Second argument by the government is what? It says that the recognition of such marital rape as a criminal offense as done by the other countries will actually affect the sanctity of the institution of marriage and potentially will lead to the false allegations, and it will eventually lead, it will be very difficult to disapprove them, and it will actually also increase the divorce rate in the country. First of all, the divorce rate in our country is actually very meager, very minuscule if we compare it with the developed countries, right? Obviously, the marriage as an institution is still believed by most of these people, correct? Next argument given by the center is what? It says that the marital rape is actually a social issue, not a legal issue, and thus it is not within the court's jurisdiction. The article again very rightfully points out that the fact that center has addressed the arguments on Article 14 and 21, that this is not violating the Article 14 right to equality, itself states that it is basically a legal issue. So what are the issues which actually transpires from this issue of marital rape? First of all, it is a legacy of Victorian patriarchal norms deriving from Indian Penal Code of 1860. It rightfully violates the Article 14 because it creates two classes of the women, right? So if you are, let's say, unmarried woman above the age of 18 years and someone does any kind of forceful activity with you, then that will be considered as rape. But just because you are married and your husband is doing it, the court will not consider it. So it is creating two classes of women based on marital status. It also violates Article 21, right? So specifically, Supreme Court held in the state of Karnataka versus Krishnappa case that sexual violence is a dehumanizing act and any form of non-consensual sexual intercourse actually amounts to sexual violence. Also, India stands as a signatory to the UN Declaration on the Elimination of Crime Against the Woman, and such marital rape has very significant impact on the victims, such as, for example, high maternal mortality rate. 16% of such women are more likely to have low birth weight baby. Also, they will face the post-traumatic stress disorder, which will actually transpires to the child's well-being in the future as well. Also, if you look towards the public, there is a huge support for the criminalization of marital rape among the public, and thus the government should do the rightful. We move forward to the next news, where we'll try to analyze an article which has been actually written by the former member of Niti Aayog about that how we need to harness the power of artificial intelligence for the benefit of India, an article which forms an important component of your GS3 paper under the theme of science and technology. What does the article suggest? The article suggests that the Indian economy is actually going to grow with 7% growth rate against the IMF projection of 3.2%. Now, artificial intelligence is obviously going to play a very critical role in India's development, so pointed by article as well. It states that India is hosting when India hosted the G20 and the global partnership on artificial intelligence, it actually solidified a very favorable geopolitical climate about it. The article mentions about India Inc., right? What is India Inc.? India Inc. is basically a kind of a term which stands for collaboratively the whole industry of our country, right? The idea is, for example, today's another article actually states how the India Inc. is likely to post a 10% rise in the net profits in the month of September. So the article is providing us some very important data. First is that India's artificial intelligence market is actually going to reach $17 billion by the year of 2027, with an annual growth rate of 25 to 35% between the year of 2024 to 2027. And India is also leading among the 13 Asia Pacific country in use and adoption of the generative artificial intelligence, which is basically, these are the applications of generative artificial intelligence, such as, for example, art and design, music composition, content creation, right? For example, let's say if you are using chat GPT to write an answer of UPSC, that is generative AI, right? So the article specifically gives the example of logistics sector, which it says that how the artificial intelligence has already brought automation, optimization, and the basic forecasting. It gives an example of Pando AIs, right, which has actually consolidated the supply chain data residing in the multiple silos, right, and that has led to what? Offering valuable analytics and services utilized by several Fortune 500 companies. Now, the National Council of Applied Economic Research, that is basically NCAER, it also states that the logistic cost of our country as a percentage of GDP has actually come down to 7 to 8%. However, remember that if you look at the Logistic Performance Index, which is released by the World Bank, it is still estimated to be around 12 to 14%, and India ranks 38th globally, right? The article is suggesting that if we very strategically utilize the generative AI, it will further uncover the hidden valuable patterns, predict disruptions, and design further more innovative solutions, right? For that purpose, the article highlights that India need to prioritize research and development in this direction, because despite generating 20% of the world's data, right, with obviously the most population in the world, we are hosting only 2% of the data centers, right, of the current computing infrastructure, and that represents less than 2% of the global capacity. So in this direction, what government has done? Government has launched your National Semiconductor Mission, under which we are trying to procure 10,000 graphic processing units, right, GPUs within the next 18 to 24 months. We are also, this National Semiconductor Mission, we are creating the fabrication plants, right? We have discussed that in the Analyst itself. Can anyone tell me in which particular state the first fabrication plant is actually being made by Tata in cooperation with one Taiwanese company, right? So in 2023, hiring of AI talent in India actually increased by 17%. So that is also a good sign, right? Highlighting the growing emphasis on artificial intelligence capabilities. And there are other initiatives which you guys can quote in your answers, such as for example, Future Skills Prime, a partnership between the industry leaders and the government, that is also essential, right? Remember that the article also points out that there are certain challenges which are being posed by artificial intelligence to us, which are the bias, the data security, the ethical use, right? So we need to deal with these issues of cyber security, etc. And for that, the article provides a kind of a way forward by suggesting the essential steps which must be taken. First is to create an artificial intelligence governance framework within the companies to address ethical concerns, data security issues. Then to prioritize transparency in artificial intelligence algorithm. Then to focus upon the inclusive artificial intelligence development by engaging diverse perspectives, and also to invest in the ethical AI research. So when you guys are reading the newspaper, this is the kind of a framework which you guys can write in your answers. With this, we move forward to the next news, where we are actually going to have look at the government's report card in the agriculture sector, which forms actually an important component of your GS3 paper. The article is very interesting. Just bear with me with a lot of data which will be thrown at you. First, the article suggests that the India's farm sector has actually registered improved growth performance, right, over the last 2 decades relative to the preceding 2, right? So we will basically divide it from with 1980 to 90, 90 to around 2000, then 2000 to 2010, and then 2010 to 2020. We will see how India has performed in agriculture sector in these 4 decades, right, as analyzed by the Niti Aayog. First of all, the report suggests that the annual growth rate for agriculture based on the gross value addition by sector. So which are the sectors which we are taking? We are taking the crops, the livestock, the fishing, and the forestry, right? So between 1980 to 1990, it was what? 2.9%, right? Now, if you look that how this GVA increased, so it first increased significantly under the UPA government and then significantly under the NDA government as well, right? So increase in the agriculture GVA, which is what? The total value of output generated by the sector minus the input, that was around 3.5% during the UPA and further increased to 3.7% under the current NDA government, right? Now, the first is that there exists a large variation in the performance of subsector within the agriculture. So, overall, we are saying it increased 3.7% in GVA in the last 10 years. Now, let's see in the subsectors. First is the crop subsector. So, that is which is normally associated with the farming, how much crops we grew, how much GVA we did in that. That recorded only 2.3% average annual growth in its output value from 2014 to 23. And remember that this growth in the crop sector was actually lower, which was 3.4% during the UPA rule. However, under the NDA government, there was significant increase in the livestock and the fisheries subsector, right, which actually grew by 5.8 and 9.2% respectively in comparison to 4.5 and 4.3 of the UPA government, right? So what we can say when we are looking at this average annual growth, look at the fishing and agriculture growth, right? Look at the livestock. When we are talking about the crops, just look at the low or meager growth. Even in the crops, horticulture crops actually formed the major section. The food grain crops GVA grew very low, very meager, right? The idea is that the farm's overall better growth performance during the current government is actually attributed to the growth in the livestock and fisheries subsector, right? So what are the policy takeaways which shall be taken by the government and you as a future bureaucrat? First is the accelerated agriculture growth during the last 2 decades is basically the result of the diversification, right, toward these fisheries, toward these food processing industries which has come up, right, towards the various horticulture crops, livestock, etc., right, which has actually been driven by what? The growing demand for vegetables, fruits, milks, eggs, fish, etc. Now, this diversification in farms has actually been accompanied by diet diversification as well, right? Because earlier the people were sticking only to their roti, dal, chawal. Now you guys have started eating a lot of vegetables thanks to social media as well. Eat this green vegetable, eat that green vegetable, correct? This additionally has enabled also by the new technologies such as, for example, hybrids in the vegetable, drip irrigation, high density tissue culture planting in your banana, or your high yielding broiler and layer breeds in the poultry. So if we look at the NSSO data for 2018-19, only 53%, right, of the Indian farmers who were engaged in this livestock, fisheries and horticulture activities, they were deriving their income from livestock rearing. Only 6.5% actually cultivated any kind of horticulture crop. So the main earning source for 44% of the agriculture household was actually what? The farming of cereals, pulses, oil seeds, sugarcane, cotton and other non-agriculture or horticulture crops. So the benefit of diversification and new production technologies have not actually percolated to these field crop the way they have done to these horticulture crop. That is the idea which article is suggesting. Oil seeds and pulses yields, they remain low, leading to a substantial share of demanding which is being met by the imports, which you guys might be coming across very frequently in the news. For example, even in the cotton, there has been no significant breakthrough from the genetically modified cotton which we actually introduced, the BT cottons, right? The crop subsector showing the low growth despite being covered under the MSP regime actually underlines the importance of the various demand side factors which the government shall take when it comes to the policy implementation and making, right? So keep these issues in your mind. You guys can use this data in your agriculture answer. We move forward to the next news, where the data sheet today actually provides a lot of important data which can be asked in your prelims examination, right? Where it actually provides the largest producers of various important critical minerals, such as, for example, bauxite. So which is the largest producer for bauxite? Keep this in mind, that is Gunia. India ranks here, right? So India is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8th number. Then when it comes to graphite, which is the largest producer of graphite in the world, that is China, followed by Brazil, right? India is here. When it comes to nickel, which is the largest producer, that is Indonesia. Keep this in your mind, right? And we do not have a significant production of nickel at all. When it comes to chromium, India is in the top 3 countries. First is Kazakhstan. India is at the rank 3rd. Keep noting these data down, right? Note down the largest producers. Lithium, there is Chile, then Australia and Argentina, right? Then coming to the rare earth minerals, there is India here at 5th. China is the largest producer of rare earth minerals. Note that down. Coming to your cobalt, DR Congo produces the largest amount of cobalt, right? South Africa is the largest producer of manganese. Peru is the largest producer of silver. Chile is again the largest producer of copper. China is the largest producer of molybdenum, and which country is the largest producer of uranium? That is Kazakhstan, right? India is somewhere here at the lower range. So remember these largest producer. Keep this, note this down. This can be a very probable question in your prelims 2025 examination. We move forward to the next news, where we are going to talk about a specific news where the heading itself is a very important, which talks about the world's biggest river, coming from your prelims section of geography paper. The article states that the world's largest river is actually being passed, where Brazil is actually digging up the Amazon river. The reason of it being the water level falling significantly low in the Amazon river, right? Why? Because of the back-to-back droughts, which is being fueled by the climate change, which we were discussing, right? So water level along the several section of Amazon river, which winds nearly 4,000 miles across the South America, has fell last month to their lowest level on the record. Keep this in mind that this Amazon river is actually considered as the world's largest river by the volume of water. Here is a very tricky question to all of you. Which river is considered as the longest river of the world, right? So there is a debate between Amazon and other river. Just name that river down. Keep this in mind that Amazon actually constitutes to 20% of the global riverine discharge into the ocean. And it discharges ultimately into which ocean? Into the Atlantic Ocean. So it originates from the region of here, from the Peru, right? And its basin lies in several countries, but the river majorly transverses into 3 countries, that is Peru, Colombia and Brazil. And it originates from here in Peru. There is Andes mountain range. So it originates from there, from the Mismi peak specifically. And it has 3 major tributaries, that is Rio Negro, Madeira and Xingu. Keep this in mind that the forest around this Amazon river is actually 50% of the total earth rainforest, and that is why this region is also considered as the lung of the earth. So remember these important facts about the Amazon river. Please answer the questions which were asked in this particular section. With this, we have reached to the end of our discussion today. Also, do not forget to attempt the questions at the end of the video and test your knowledge. We will meet in a very interesting discussion very soon. So till then, all the very best for your preparation and thank you.